Hello everyone, welcome back to the Replay Studio. Today we're going to be talking a bit about Netflix's live action adaptation of Cowboy Bebop. This video actually took me a few days to actually complete. I actually recorded the very first episode with the intention of doing a weekly reaction for it. But after watching the first episode, I kind of got what the creators were actually going for. And I decided it was best to just binge it and just do a full review thereafter. Now, if you're not new to the channel, then you do know I've been very vocal about live action adaptations because I do see some merit to them in that, where I can see success in bringing in new fans to some of these IPs that are somewhat hidden gems. Cowboy Bebop is not so much hidden. It's well known as one of the best anime of all time, and its influence is certainly spread throughout the years. But nonetheless, I felt I was willing to give this a shot because, much like all the other live action adaptations, I thought that it would be good to bring new fans to this series. And so I'm always there, things like The Witcher, which I've thoroughly enjoyed, and I've been in support of that. Where anime is concerned, it's a bit tricky because a lot of the characters, places, story beats tend to be somewhat nuanced, with some over the top things that you can't necessarily adapt one-to-one directly to live action because it just doesn't work as well as it would animated. But there have been some successes. Rurouni Kenshin, which has done very well. They did change the story somewhat in Rurouni Kenshin, but they remain true to the heart of the source material. And they knocked it out of the park. I thought the Beach adaptation was actually done well as well. The Fullmetal Alchemist adaptation was okay. It wasn't great, but it was okay. So there have been a few hit and misses. I think there have been more misses where anime is concerned. And so coming into this, as with everyone else, as much as I was looking forward to a live action adaptation, I was still a bit skeptical going in. So even after binging this a few days ago, I've been kind of just letting it simmer. I just want to digest it all first so that I don't react in a way that I would as a fan of the art, as a fan of the series, and just give a review that's without bias, so I wanted to give myself a few days to kind of digest, go back, check out a few things, or rewatch some of the episodes, so I could really appreciate what the showrunner was actually attempting to do here. So yes, now that I've done all of that, we're gonna just break this up into some of the good, and the bad, and then we'll go into our conclusion, and we'll talk about some of the characters and story beats and the things that things that I felt could have been done better, and things that I thought may have been done differently from the anime, but may have done the series justice in that respect regardless. All right, so we'll start off with the good, and I will say, when the casting information was announced for the three main leads, for Spike, Faye, and Jet, there was a lot of mixed reaction to it. Some were, some were nicer than others. But I thought initially when the casting was announced, I thought that the characters actually fit well with what I was expecting. And oddly, going into the anime and watching as we went up, we were leading up to the actual release, and seeing them embody the character in interviews, seeing how they talk about the characters, what they felt resonated with them, and then the character's story And of course, there was some expectation that they would need to flesh out the characters a bit more than the anime actually did, because a lot of characters in the anime had very few lines, but they had subtle ways of communicating to the audience what the characters' intentions actually were. But with a live action adaptation, and one that would run a lot longer than the actual anime in terms of what it's trying to tell, they need to fill in some of the gaps there, here and there. So one of the things I thought was done especially well was the casting, and the standout character for me in this series was actually Mustafa Shakir playing Jet. Both his relationship with Spike and Jet, the character himself, I thought was just really, really well done. I found that Mustafa was the only actor who was actually attempting to sort of copy the character that he was trying to embody, and there are times when that could go woefully wrong and it's just horrible. But then there are those who do their own thing and that works, and then there are some who manage to find a middle ground and then that works. And I think that's what Mustafa was trying to do. He tried to mimic Jet's voice. That's the English actor. I forgot the English actor's name, but he was trying to mimic Jet's voice, but also not to the point where his own voice was unrecognizable. But he got it so right that if I closed my eyes, I would think it was actually still Jet speaking. And I thought he did a phenomenal job, just the voice alone. And if they did some animated adaptation, I can see him filling in the role of Jet, no problem. So it was interesting because some of the backlash from the casting itself was, okay, they made Jet black and that's going to be the big issue, but he was the only character that I thought was actually accurately done. And true to Jet himself, he still remained the heart of the crew, despite his mannerisms of pretending not to care and putting a wall up for most of them, and he's just cranky all the time, and that's Jet. But the story with his daughter, he's still an ex-cop here. In the anime itself, it didn't go too much into Jet's background. We did have an episode where he went back to visit this woman that he had a relationship with. But that was pretty much it. For the most part, I thought the other characters got a bit more development in the anime than Jet himself does. But we do see glimpses of Jet's past through his old connections with the police and in the underground and so on, from when he used to work as a cop. And that was translated beautifully here in the live action adaptation, I felt. And they just added to what was already there for Jet as a character, and I thought it worked really well. Mustafa, kudos to him. His acting, and my first encounter with the actor himself was in Luke Cage where he played Bushmaster. I thought he did a fantastic job there as well. So give this man more roles. Is what I'm trying to say. Give this man more roles, because he did an exceptional job there, and he did an exceptional job here as well. So it's interesting that we don't see him in a whole lot. Hopefully, despite whatever the feedback from this series, he does get a bit he does get more time in the limelight, because he does deserve it. He's a great actor. Stuff as Jet I thought was really, really well done. His relationship with Spike was well done. So on that note, we go on to John Cho, who I was skeptical about going in because mostly because of his in the anime, and this is one of the things again I don't think you can get quite right when you're doing an anime adaptation, because the character is drawn to be a bit lanky and very tall, and John Cho is of course significantly older, I think, than Spike actually would be in the anime, and that kind of shows. I think he had an on-set incident. I'm not sure if it was related or not, but where he was injured on set and they had to take a break for a beat. But I felt they needed to cast someone a bit younger who could actually do some of the stunts themselves. And I'm not sure John Cho did his own stunt work here or not, but Yeah, I was a bit concerned, but after watching the first half of the series, I will say, or the first three episodes, I was actually blown away by his performance. I thought he, unlike Mustafa, he wasn't attempting to copy, at least insofar as his lines, he wasn't attempting to copy Spike from the anime. You know, he was recreating the character himself and doing his own version of the character. But it wasn't to the point where I felt it was jarring at all. His mannerisms still seem to be in line with what I expect from Spike, the character. And so, as the episodes went along, episode one, two, three, I think by episode three, I was already, impressed by what he had managed to accomplish, and he managed to make me like this version of Jet. I'm sorry, of Spike, and I thought he did a very good job. Both he and Mustafa as Jet, their chemistry, and that's one of the other things that the series actually got right, and it's their bromance. It was just very reminiscent of what I remembered, between Spike and Jet on the Bebop from the anime itself. They just had great on-screen chemistry. Their back and forth banter, it was just very, very well done. All the scenes that we found them in. But we're gonna move on a bit later on when we get into the other characters, and we'll speak a bit more about Spike's interaction with some of the other characters that from his past and how that impacts the character himself. Now, the other thing that was really well done was the music and the score throughout the series itself. And I'm not even sure that's so much a credit to the showrunner or the series itself, because many of what was used was actually just pulled directly from the anime. So it's not so much what they created as it is what they borrowed, and I guess that worked. If it's not broken, why fix it? So they just took what existed already in the anime and just transferred it here. And I know they did revise some of that to modernize it a bit, I suppose, is the word. But for the most part, it was very, very similar to what I expected, what I experienced in the anime. It was the same music and the same score. And I know they brought back Yoko Kano onto the project itself to record or re-record some of this. And I was watching one of the making of videos and interviewed with Yoko, and I know they re-recorded some of the music for the anime, again to kind of make it more palatable to modern audiences, and it was really well done. So that was one of the things that I really appreciated about it, and it just I just found myself having flashbacks to certain scenes and events that happened in the anime just through listening to the music and the score throughout. So that was exceptionally well done, and it speaks to some of the lessons that they could have taken away from this in knowing what things to borrow and what not to borrow from the actual anime, as far as the story beats go. But again, we'll touch on that a little bit later on. Outside of the music and the score, the set design and the set pieces, I wasn't so much concerned about that going in, because this is Netflix's first space opera type series, or film. I've seen a few on Netflix. None that really left an impression, but as far as the design goes, I thought I wasn't worried because you see Netflix do series with giant set piece design and stuff like that before, and typically that's not where they have trouble. So here I'm looking at the ships, the swordfish Spike ship looked excellent. The essence of what they were going for with this, it felt it was a bit different from the anime, but it worked. It reminded me more like less of a noir as despite the fact that that's what they were supposed to be going for, since that is what Cowboy Bebop is, more of a noir style anime. I didn't get that noir feeling watching this series, but I got the themes of what they were trying to go for. It felt more like Captain Harlock type thing. I don't know, for those who are familiar with that anime. And there was a film recently on Netflix, uh, Space Collectors or Trash Collectors or something like that, where it was this crew. It was very similar to Cowboy Bebop, and it had this crew that finds this little girl who was genetically engineered. Not, they didn't know it at the time, and they were being hunted, and they end up, you know, be having affections for the little girl and deciding to protect her rather than turning her over for the money that they would have gained by giving her back. I like the story of that, and when I watched it, it reminded me a whole lot of Cowboy Bebop, and clearly they borrowed a lot from Cowboy Bebop for that movie. I think it was a Chinese film. I can't remember the name now, but while editing, I'll probably just throw it up somewhere. But yeah, so it reminded me very much of that, and again, to the point I was making in that, I wasn't worried that Netflix would not be able to get the aesthetics down, and they did. It didn't feel like it was Cowboy Bebop, but it still felt like a grand space opera. The ship designs, all the costumes, and all that was actually done fairly well. Now, on the subject of costumes, we can. Speaking about Spike and Jet, when the set, pictures were released for the cast again in costume, there was a lot of mixed reviews there as well. In particular, when I did see, and I usually try not to check out those set photos, before a series is released, because they're still photos, and you're just not going to get a true representation of what they represent until you see them in motion during the series or in action. So I typically try to steer away from them, but because this is Cowboy Bebop, I couldn't help myself. Plus, it was all over the internet and it was a bit difficult to ignore, so I did check them out. And as usual, the photos just didn't do it justice, because while Spike's suit got a lot of criticism when the photos were released, in the actual series, I felt that it fit really well. I don't know if perhaps after seeing feedback they went and adjusted his suit, so it felt more fitted to him than it was in the photo itself when it was released. So they could have done some adjustment there, or perhaps not, and it was just a set photo, and set photos always look like trash. So I don't know why people keep going to them and using them as reference as to what the end product will actually be. So Spike's Spike's suit was really well tailored. I thought it embodied what I expected Spike to actually look like. Jet looked pretty phenomenal as well. His mechanical arm, at first I was concerned about that looking rubbery and less mechanical, because it was clear that it wasn't. I don't think it was CGI. It seemed mostly practical, or it was practical with CGI modified on top of that, to make it appear more realistic. But it was really well done. It didn't. There were no points in the series where I caught anything and was thinking, okay, that looks like a rubber arm. That looks like a rubber glove or something like that. So I think it was a combination of practical and CGI, but it looked really good. So that was one of my concerns going in, and that lived up to my expectations, and it did look pretty realistic. The Faye's ship, the swordfish, the Bebop itself, I think it's safe to say that whoever it is that was working on the set pieces did a fantastic job. I'm not sure if they've worked on similar projects before or not, but they got this pretty damn right, But again, as I mentioned, it was less of a noir feel to it and more of a space cyberpunk type feel to it, which is, again, as I said, which was not what Cowboy Bebop was. This leaned more towards cyberpunk than Cowboy Bebop the anime ever did. So it was quite interesting. But it was something that I still found myself liking, despite despite the difference between the actual anime itself. So I thought they did a really fantastic job with that itself. Moving on to the bad. Okay. Oh, this is, and the reason why I decided to discuss this after the good is because this is a much more extensive list than the actual good portion. But let's get into it. Okay. The standout, of course, for this section is most certainly going to be Vicious and Julia. And if you've seen any other reviews, or you've gone on Reddit or on social media and you've seen reaction to these characters, they are one of the significant changes that were made and simultaneously the most problematic. Let's go into Vicious at first. For those who have not watched the anime, Vicious is a character who gets very little screen time. Likewise for Julia as well. They both are not too present in the anime and serve only as background characters to flesh out Spike's story. And that's what makes the characters great. Now with this series, I suppose they felt that there was a need to actually give them more screen time. I don't think that was absolutely necessary, because Cowboy Bebop had enough episodes that I thought at least more than twice the number of episodes that this series actually has, and I think that's enough material to actually make a full season that covers the entire story without needing to flesh out Vicious and Julia. So it wasn't necessary to give them more screen time. Most of what was covered in the anime itself included a lot of bounties that Spike, Jet, and Faye actually went after, and all of that was actually missing from the series itself. They covered some of the more integral and important ones in the series, but they missed out on quite a few of them, and they left them out in favor of giving more screen time to Vicious and the Syndicate and to Julia. Was that the right call? Now in hindsight, I don't think it was. I'm sure there could have been a way to do that and not have the jarring feeling that everyone has now with Julia and Vicious. But unfortunately, this was not one of those cases. So they decided to cut some of the bounties that the team would have normally gone on in favor of giving Vicious and Julia more screen time. And unfortunately, in this case, it didn't work because Vicious and Julia were just so unlikable. It wasn't just that they were very different from their actual characters. They were just unlikable characters. Vicious himself, as I mentioned, very little screen time. A man of very few words. In fact, in the anime, he doesn't say a whole lot. He for the most part, and again, this is some anime bias because I don't think that character would work a whole lot well in live action. He's always just in the background brooding, and then he'll kill someone for no reason. And it works in anime. It wouldn't necessarily translate that great on in live action. It can be done, I believe, but it just wasn't done in this case. What they decided to go for in this series was a Vicious who was so uncertain of himself, which was my huge issue because that's never been Vicious. He doesn't hesitate. He's not cowardly. He's not afraid to get his hands dirty. And so this version of Vicious appears to have his father is a member of the Syndicate, and so he's pretty much relegated to being a rich, spoiled brat with daddy issues. And that kind of just this, I don't know. I feel as though this would be the one instant where I will say it does a disservice to the story and the character by making him out to be some um, you know some spoiled brat with daddy issues. That's just how he comes across. He has a temper. His relationship with Julia is much more, um, I guess, much. It's a lot more than it was in the anime. In my experience watching the anime, Vicious's relationship with Julia was more. It was more about, this is a thing that Spike actually wants, and I'm going to take that from him. That was his dynamic with Julia in the anime. Yeah, again, this was my experience. I'm not sure about anyone else's, but this was my experience. And in this series, it's supposedly love, but Vicious is not. In the anime, I don't think Vicious is capable of love. That was the character. He was using Julia no more than just a tool that he could discard at any point when he felt he needed to. But they changed that dynamic and they made it to the point where he was this lovesick puppy who was constantly pandering for Julia's affections, and very jealous, and that is what. And the character could have worked, or that his relationship and dynamic with Julia could have worked if that wasn't the thing that was motivating him. If they had done this interpretation of the character where he still loved Julia, and that was still what binded him to Spike, but at the same time make it so that his ambitions were his own and they weren't being driven by either Julia manipulating him or his need for his father's approval. Had they done the relationship as a separate thing, and Vicious's his ambitions to take over the syndicate, his own making, I would have liked the character a lot more. I would have liked him a lot more. But instead, what we got was him being manipulated by Julia, his wife, into making certain moves, and his constant need to be seen by his father being the driving force behind the character. And that was just a huge miss for me. That was just a huge miss. Vicious didn't so much use guns. He can use them, but his weapon of choice has always been his sword. And one of the most disappointing things about the series for me was both the standoff between Spike and Vicious, but the choreography itself. I came into this expecting to see amazing choreography, and I'm not sure if it's a case where, because the actor may have been doing his own stunts, they were not able to pull that off. But the main thing was the Spike and Vicious finale at the end. I was expecting something on the level of Equilibrium. For those of you who have seen Equilibrium, where there's a lot of gun fu with gun versus sword, and it's a phenomenal film. And I was expecting something fast-paced and well choreographed and well shot like that. And so coming in, I was a bit disappointed because, of course, Spike is a very a very good martial artist, and so most of his scenes in the anime, when they do happen, there aren't a whole lot of moments where he just goes all out. There aren't a whole lot of those, but when he does go all out, it's something to behold. Especially in the movie, the Cowboy Bebop film, if you watch that as well, he's really good. And so I was expecting to see that translated here, because that's one of the few things that it's not over the top, it's not unrealistic, it's not something that they can't do. And so this was the thing that I at least expected them to actually fail at. The opening scene, I thought was really good. There were some nice shots there. When they were interrupting this robbery, and that's directly from the anime as well. In fact, I think they may have changed some things. Well, of course they did, but it reminded me a bit more of the opening scene from the movie, and not so much from the anime, where they're interrupting a robbery at a store. Yeah. So John Cho, again, I'm not sure if he did his own stunts, but some of the choreography was really slow in some areas. Um, I just didn't think it was really well done. There are some, and again, there were some shots that were really, really well done. There was this particular scene where he was in the bathroom and the syndicate sent an assassin after him, and he was fighting that guy. Um, and I think the guy was pushing him against the wall and he was backing up and he moved backwards, moved his feet up backwards, up the wall, walking up the wall backwards, and then used his knees to knee the guy in the face. And I thought that was, I was like, oh my god, that was amazing. So there are a few moments throughout the series where you do see the Spike. I'm gonna call him the Spike here, where you see Spike's amazing skills as a martial artist come through, and some of the often ridiculous movements that he would do in the anime come through. But for the rest, it just didn't. It wasn't consistent. It wasn't consistent throughout, and that was especially the case in the end with Vicious versus Spike, and even Spike versus the minions, because in the anime towards the end when Spike goes after Vicious, he has to go through a whole horde of syndicate members to get there. But instead what we had was Faye coming in and taking out several of those guys, and we'll get to Faye in a bit because I know that's one of the things people have been a bit disappointed with. So I'll give my thoughts on that afterwards. So Spike ended up only taking out about two guys, and then going after Vicious. So we didn't get a full demonstration of what Spike is actually capable of, just bits and pieces. There was a moment where Jet took Spike to trade for Jet's daughter, and they discovered that Vicious wasn't actually there with her. It was just a hologram. And of course a whole group of syndicate members came through, and I was like, okay, this is gonna be the moment where we see both Jet and Spike go all out and take these guys out. And to my disappointment, they cut away to something else, and then cut back to where Jet and Spike were caught. And I was so disappointed there because I thought this would have been the moment to demonstrate why these guys are good as they are, how they survive this long for that matter. Show us the fight, show us the fight. Even if they end up getting caught in the end, show us the fight. Show me, don't tell me, and that's the thing that the show missed so many times where that's concerned. The whole show me don't tell me scenario, and they missed completely where that's concerned. And there were so many moments to get it right, but they just didn't. All right, so Julia. So outside of my disappointment with the showdown between Vicious and Spike being less than what I imagined, Julia as a character was something of a disappointment. Now I don't know a whole lot about the actress, whether this was her first role, and much like Vicious, the acting, maybe I didn't mention that before, but the acting was not particularly great. Vicious seemed over the top with the majority of the roles he was given, and for another character that might actually work, but for Vicious it doesn't, and that will I'll cover that a bit more in my conclusion as far as why this should have been its own thing and not Cowboy Bebop. But Julia as a character was not particularly good as well, not so much just because she's so different from the character, but because the character herself was just not very likable. The Julia from the anime was, again, much like Vicious, not given a whole lot of screen time. She was this elegant, ethereal character who you weren't sure existed or not, and that was the point, because from Spike's perspective, it was like he was still in a dream, and that's a theme that that exists throughout the anime, where he was supposed to be dead, so all of this what he's experiencing is and he, as he interprets it, is just a dream. because I mean, and because it's not something that he feels he deserves, because of his past. So that's a theme that's recurring throughout the anime, and is woefully absent here in the series. So Julia has always been this kind of elegant, ethereal being that you just couldn't hold on to, and you weren't sure if she was real or not because she was just beautiful and elusive. But here, this character was one again. Her relationship with Vicious was just very, very, very odd and unusual. Her relationship with Spike was unusual. We did get a flashback as to how in one of the episodes, to how her relationship with Spike developed, and that was a bit disappointing because it felt as though okay, it was more. I saw you one night, and then we had this moment. They had that one moment at the club, where they felt close to each other, and it's like okay, that's it. We're gonna have sex now, you know. And then all of a sudden it's like I love you, and I just couldn't connect. There was just no valid argument as to why these two were together, and it was more along the lines of okay, she's hot, so you know, of course we're gonna fight over her. That's what boys do. And it was just very, very jarring how the writer decided to interpret the relationship with Spike and Julia, and the relationship with Julia and Vicious. Of course, in this instance, you know, Julia was, I'm assuming, intended to be. By the end, she was intended to be this character who decided to take control over her own independence. But at the same time, the only reason she went for Vicious was because of his connections and his wealth. And I can't fathom why she decided to go with Spike, because I just didn't see how they fell in love. That was just absent from the entire series. So they didn't do a particularly good job of building up the relationships and the chemistry between Julia and Spike to understand why any of that happened. It was just not there. It was just not there. And I'm not sure, at the risk of offending anyone, and I'm not trying to, but why does the actress look like an Instagram model? You know, she was just lacking that. Again, the elegance that you were expecting from the Julia character, and it was just not there at all. It was just not there at all. And going towards the end, with Julia coming in, shooting Spike through the glass. Again, very, very different from the way the anime would have gone. Which came out of nowhere, and again, as I mentioned, I don't know if this was some attempt to suggest that she was taking control of her life now, and taking her own independence into her own hands, and also the men who've been controlling her. But the accusation at the end that Spike made her into this made absolutely no sense. It made no sense whatsoever. I mean, her relationship with Vicious was one of her own making. This wealthy guy from the syndicate approached her, and she decided, okay, I'm his. And she went along with it. And then she accuses Spike of abandoning her and not saving her. And this is the problem with the idea that this is her empowerment moment as a woman, is that she's crediting Spike with being the one to create her, and worse than that, she's saying that she's this way because he did not save her. So she wanted someone to come and save her. And throughout the series, I was wondering to myself, even before we got to that scene when she wanted Vicious dead, I found myself wondering out aloud, you're his wife, you sleep with him every night where he's unarmed, has no guards. You are in the best position to kill Vicious. You are in the best position to kill Vicious. And a part of me said, okay, maybe she's not doing that because if she kills him, the syndicate might turn on her and then kill her instead. But then the syndicate follows her at the end, while Vicious is still alive, because apparently, there's no explanation as to why the syndicate chose to follow her. Let's say, okay, the leaders of the syndicate are dead. Why are they going to follow Vicious's wife when Vicious is still alive? It makes no sense. So if she could have killed him without any repercussions, why didn't she do that herself earlier? So the explanation that they gave at the end, or the suggestion that this was some sort of empowerment movement for her, it just fell flat, because one, the decision made no sense, the motivation made no sense, the accusation that Spike somehow made her despite her own choices made no sense. And this could be because they want to address those issues later on, in that it's not Spike didn't make you made those decisions yourself. That could be the whole reasoning behind it. Maybe they'll attempt to address it later on when she realizes that. But it was poorly done here. It was just poorly done here, and there was no reason for any of the decisions she actually made. There was no reason for the syndicate to follow Vicious's wife when Vicious is still alive. I mean, the anime ends a bit ambiguous, where you don't know whether Vicious or Spike are alive. The assumption is that they're both dead, because big explosion, Spike fell through the glass. I think the assumption is that he's dead. He survived a lot of near-death experiences, so there's a possibility that he survived, and so same for Vicious as well. But the assumption is that they're dead. In the series, of course, we see that they're full well alive here, and for the story going forward, I suppose they needed them to be alive. But I don't know. From what I've seen here, to be honest, I don't know if I'm going to be tuning in for a second season. I mean, we'll see. But I guess I didn't know. I didn't know if it would end any other way. But when they first announced the series, I actually thought the first season would only cover maybe the first half of the anime, and then season 2 would cover the last half. So I didn't expect to see the conclusion with Vicious and Spike here in this season. So it's just a bit jarring to say, okay, we're at the end of their story already in season 1, when there was so much that they could have used in this season. As I said, a lot of the bounties that existed in the anime were just missing here. It was completely missing. So both Julia and Vicious, as adaptations of the character from the anime, they completely fell flat. So they were nothing like the characters that were from the anime. And as characters themselves in an otherwise unknown series, the way that I try to view this on its own, not Cowboy Bebop, they were still, their motivations were still muddy and unclear and made very little sense, and at times over the top and unnecessary. So I found myself, I found these two characters to be the biggest issue with not just lore but the series overall, because they were so integral to this story, even though they weren't that integral to the anime, but they were so integral to this story that it's very difficult to overlook or ignore the blunders that were actually made where these characters are concerned. So they were definitely they were definitely not written the best, and they're the things I'm looking forward to the least for the new season, if we do indeed get one. Okay, now we'll move on to Faye. Yes, to Faye. Oh my god. Alright. And let me preface this by saying Daniela Pineda had made some comments going into the before the release, going into the anime and into the series, that some people didn't like. And to be honest, I fully support her, the things that she said. I fully support what she said. She responded directly to some tweets and stuff that she was getting from fans about her not having big breasts to match the anime Faye. And rightfully so, she responded. And I don't care who's upset about that. You don't go at the actress about that. She's already been cast in the role. Let her do her part, and whether you like it or not, you make your decision then. But there's no person on earth who's going to look exactly like the anime character. And I love the anime, but I live in the real world. Come on, guys, you need to be able to separate that, right? Some people were just bombarding her with comments about her not having large enough breasts and stuff, and so she put out a video saying that okay, yeah, unfortunately she doesn't have those, and so on. I mean, guys, do better. At times there are some vocal few who give members in the anime community a bad name because of their overreaction to certain things, and it's just not acceptable. So I fully supported what she said going into the series. Now for the series itself, Faye as a character in the series was not Faye from the anime at all. I thought the actress did well with the script she was given, but it was not a very good script. Now, one of the things I noticed first off with this character, well, clearly everyone noticed, was her outfit, which was significantly different. Now, I chose not to mention that earlier on when I was discussing the set and costumes, because this falls into the bad category. And it's not bad because it's not as scantily, looking as the anime. I don't particularly need it. I didn't particularly need that. But I do think there could have been a way to use the same costume or use the same clothes that Spig had in the anime, but still make it appealing, without looking too scantily, if that's what the actress had a concern with. So they could have still done the yellow overalls and bottoms as well, and maybe had her wear stockings or something. There are ways they could have done that, and actually made it work. But one of the things that I thought was a bit of a lazy excuse that they gave was that it restricted the actress's movements, and so that was one of the reasons why they couldn't use it. And perhaps that is true. Every project is actually different. But just for contrast, everyone is checking out Alice in Borderland now, which is a manga adaptation. There was an anime for that as well, so it's an adaptation similarly. And there's a character in that series called Kuina, and for the most part, for the entirety of the series, or the one episode where Kuina kicks ass, because she's also she's a martial artist, and where she kicks ass, she does it in a bikini. Yeah, so to my point, to say that Faye's outfits would have restricted her movements, I just don't think that I don't think that was really a valid reason. Now, if it is that, again, as I said, if it is that the actress just didn't feel particularly comfortable in that outfit, I can accept that if that was the reason that they actually gave. But if that was the reasoning behind it, I still think they could have done her outfit justice and just made it a bit more covered. I don't think that's what we got, not from what I saw. I don't believe that that's what we actually got. Faye's lines were just a bit unbelievable throughout the entirety of the series. As I said before, this is not Faye. Her delivery with the lines that she's been giving, her mannerisms, her cursing and swearing at every turn, and it's something that a lot of the characters actually do, but more so Faye than any of the others. And some of the lines, especially at the end there when Spike was going back into the church to fight Vicious, and her line there was just very cringe, and that's just not something that Faye would actually see. So I felt Faye's the change in the character was very similar to the change in her outfit, in that it was just very drastic and not representative of the character at all. This was not Faye. No, as a character that's not Faye in a series that is not Cowboy Bebop, it works. You know, it works. It's at least serviceable. You know, but as you know, as the Faye, the character and portrayal, I kept asking myself, what, how does adding cursing to the series and curse words to the series, how does it elevate this series in particular? The anime did not have any f bombs or anything like that because it just wasn't necessary. The story was beautiful on its own. Um, it wasn't necessary, and it felt as though the showrunner or the writers decided that in order to adapt this for a Western audience, they needed to make it gun ho and remove remove all the nuance because they have so little faith that Western audiences could understand complex stories without, you know, without f bombs and cursing and all that. It just, you know, it was just woefully bad. It was just terrible. So Faye being relegated to this overly perverse and sexualized character, and that's the odd thing because, you know, you'd think the biggest concern coming into this was her appearance, you know, giving the impression that she was that kind of person. But when they adapted her into the series, they ended up making her very perverse, and all her comments were sexual in nature or just over the top. And that's not what Faye was. Despite her outfit, she used her sexuality as a femme fatale to get access to things that she otherwise couldn't in this world. Get closer to bounty so she could take them out. And you saw, you know, she mentioned one bounty that she took care of in this series by getting close to the guy there. And that's what Faye did in the anime. That was the purpose of her outfit, to disarm the people around her and not take her seriously or know that she's as skillful as she actually is. But in the series, it's something that they're constantly reminding you of, that okay, yeah, she's into this stuff. She's very sexual in nature, and she's a potty mouth, and she's very perverse, and all her jokes revolve around that one theme. And then there's the scene that a lot of people had some issues with, which was making Faye at the very least bisexual, if not gay. Now, my thoughts on that, in the anime itself, I mean, there was no suggestion whether she was bi or not. I don't think she was gay, because there were moments where you felt as though she had affections towards Spike, to the point where when he was leaving, she was threatening to shoot him so that he would not go. Now, that could be interpreted as her just being a good comrade, a good partner. But I think the audience interprets that as it's something more. She does have affection. She does have feelings towards Spike. But here, you know, I'm not sure whether the change was necessary. Now, is it a problem with Faye herself being bi? No. But the character was never established to be bi or gay. There were never any hints of that in the actual series. None. Again, as I mentioned, if this was another series by another name, Faye was a different character, it would be completely fine. Would it have made sense? No, because there was nothing leading up to that scene that suggested that she was. So a different character, I can see it working a bit more, but for Faye as a character, it just did not make sense, because she had a relationship, or a developing relationship, with the lead character in the actual series. So it was just quite an odd change to actually make, and one that, and I'm in agreement with a lot of people here in that it's one that felt like it was just added to maybe service a community and just say, okay, to the LGBT community, here, there's something for you. But I don't think anyone in that community would be appreciative of just that, you know, when there are already characters like Gren who exist in this universe who could embody that. So there was no need to, okay, let me just change Faye to be this character just for the sake of just for doing it. There was no reasoning for it, so it made very little sense. And of course, even those in the community, if they watch this show now and they go back to watch the animated series, they're gonna be disappointed, because they're not going to see that relationship, that kind of relationship. They're not going to see that interaction in the anime, because it just doesn't exist. So who were they trying to appease here? So it was just very odd, all just very odd. So again, I mean, it's not an issue with, a character being bisexual in a series. It is this specific character being bisexual because she was never established as such. Right, so they completely removed the feelings between Faye and Spike in this adaptation and decided to replace that with this random mechanic, and that was the other problem with it, is that, as I mentioned, they just made Faye overly sexualized, so she just ran into this one mechanic who she knows nothing about. And one of the reasons why she never acted on her feelings with Spike in the anime is because she has trouble trusting people. And she immediately tossed that out the window here in this adaptation to sleep with a mechanic that she has only just met, just for the purpose of just adding that scene and making her bisexual. So the issue is not that she's bisexual, it's how it happened and why it happened, none of which made any sense, whether from the source or in this adaptation itself, right? That aside, the other thing that was a significant change, and this most likely was, I think, deserves more criticism than any of the others. There's some bad stuff. Right? Between Vicious, Faye, and Julia, there's definitely some bad stuff. But the thing that I think should be talked about the most, and receives the most criticism, is how they've changed a lot of the story beats and removed a lot of the nuance that was actually in the actual anime. The very first bounty that the team actually chases is this couple who's running away from the syndicate, right? I believe I believe the woman was a daughter of someone from the syndicate, or one of the leaders, if I'm remembering that correctly. But nonetheless, they were running away from the syndicate, right? And the guy was supposed to be selling red eye, and he's been going around town trying to get sales so that they could have enough money to run away together, right? That was also the opening bounty for the team in the anime as well. So that was I was expecting that to be one of my favorite episodes. And for the most part, I liked the episode here as it was adapted, until we got to the point where they were attempting to escape and the guy dies. Now, the reason why this is important is because in the anime, she has a conversation with Spiker, and much like she did in the adaptation here, about creating a new life for themselves with the guy that she loves. But as they're about to escape, she intentionally kills her lover because she realizes that he's become addicted to the red eye, because he's been using it occasionally to demonstrate for the customer before he gets the sale. And he's gotten to the point now where he's just pure rage, and he's just constantly using it, and so she realizes that there's no hope and she doesn't want to see him like this, and she kills him herself. Now in this adaptation, they completely remove that scene and have the guy just die by the hand of the syndicate. Now again, I spoke a few times about how certain themes weave themselves in and out of the storyline throughout the anime itself, about hope, about loss, decisions that certain characters are forced to actually make. And this was one of the cases where it was just poorly done, or the writers just didn't understand that concept. And I refuse to accept that they didn't understand why it was done that way in the anime. And instead, I think I'm choosing to believe that they knew that's how it was done and why it was done that way, but they decided that a Western audience would not understand that scene with the woman killing her lover herself, and so they removed it entirely and just had him die randomly at the hands of one of the syndicate. I don't know. So that first episode just really upset me, because it's like there was a reason why she chose to kill him. I just don't understand why you decide to remove that scene and just have him die, not by her hands, but by someone else's. When it was a poignant scene, and it had a purpose, you know. And I just think about that scene in the anime when she kills him. Spike looks at her in her final moments before she gets killed herself. You know, and it was just beautifully done in the anime, because they were meant to represent hope and what happens when you actually have hope, and it gets pulled away from you. And that was just gone from this adaptation. That was just gone, and many of the bounties that they actually went on were it was completely missing as well. There was towards the end, when Faye got the cassette tape that had her, you know, the glimpses of her past as a teenager on. In the anime, the way that it's done, she does get the tape, but she's not able to play it because they don't have a VCR on the ship to actually play. Now, the reason she was able to actually see it, and people can correct me if I'm wrong, was that Jet and Spike, initially it was just out of fun. And the episode itself was very comical. It was, you know, they went to, I think it was Earth, or they went to some other planet, but I think it was Earth, or maybe I'm wrong, but they went to another planet and decided to find the tape so that they could see Faye's past. And it was this entire story for one entire episode of them going to this place and going to this market and asking this guy, do you have this VCR that can play this? And they eventually get to a location and almost died getting the tape, and then when they finally get it, they get back to the Bebop, and she plays. She wasn't with them. I don't think she even knew any of this was happening at the time. But it was just a touching moment, and it was a moment of how it was just a weird way of showing how they cared about Faye without them saying they actually cared about Faye in the anime, and so they got the VCR so that she could actually play the tape. And all of that was removed from this adaptation. They just had a VCR ready to just play, completely disregarding the reason for that episode in the anime and why it was important. And so that was completely missing. So there are, with every bounty in the anime, every bounty has a purpose. It has a story. The bomber himself had a story. You know, in the anime, there was a reason why he was doing it, and that was cut from this adaptation as well. And he was just a guy that wanted to blow shit up. So a lot of the nuance and, you know, messages that were woven throughout the animated series was just completely removed from the adaptation, and it was just turned into a futuristic Western action shoot 'em up, and that was it, you know, and that was it. So that was, I don't know, that was just a significant disappointment for me. That was just a bit disappointing. Oh man. All right. Ed and Ein. Now I know, I know there were. Ein was. I have no complaints about Ein actually. I think Ein was actually well done. Outside of the whole thing projecting from the eyes thing, which was just odd. But I thought Ein was really well done. I know people actually had some complaints about Ed. Ed towards the end. We only got a short glimpse of Ed, and I can see some merits to the complaints. I didn't have a problem with Ed in particular, really. I didn't. I thought it's too soon to tell. I think I need to see more of Ed, because Spike was passed out on the ground and we're looking up from his perspective, so it had a weird angle. The character was over the top, but Ed is supposed to be over the top. I'm just not sure if there's a way to do that Ed in live action. So I think in this case, it's one of the rare occasions where they actually need to change the character significantly to actually work, and they didn't. I didn't have a problem with the costuming. Yeah, the hair was weird, but I think they can fix that. But the over the top Ed, the problem is that Ed is over the top in the anime. But there's no way they'll be able to do that completely, because Ed does some weird stuff, sliding into some weird places and moving around, and just things that you're not going to be able to do with a real person. right? So there's no way to do Ed accurately as she is in the anime. So the best thing to do would be to tone Ed down, you know, and yeah, just make her a kid. That just make her a kid that just acts bizarre, and you'll be fine. So they have to. This again, as I said, this is the one case where they need to change the character, and they just didn't. But you can't do Ed realistically. In terms of one-to-one adaptation, so you have to tone Ed down, and just make her a weird ass kid who's a hacker, who's a genius hacker, and some weird quirks. So yeah, so that's all they need to do with Ed. Don't try to do over the top Ed, because you can't get to that height completely, and then you're just going to miss. You're just going to miss completely. So tone Ed down, and Ed should actually work. All right, so we're finally at the end of our discussion, and I mean, I'll say this was an ambitious attempt. This was an ambitious attempt at doing an adaptation of a beloved franchise. Will they do a season 2? I'm not sure. Should they do a season 2? They will do a season 2, but I don't think they should. In all honesty, I don't think they should. I do think it's a wasted opportunity, because they have some good actors and actresses in the key three, in Spike, Jet, and Faye. They do have some phenomenal actors there, and I think they could have done a better job in a different story. And that was my main takeaway from this series overall, is that as an adaptation of Cowboy Bebop, I think it was not really well done, and I don't feel either the writers didn't understand the story of the source, or they understood it and they decided that it would not service Western audiences very well, and so they decided to change it. Whatever the case might be, it was a poorly adapted series. As a series on its own, by another name, I think it was serviceable. And they could improve on it as the series goes along. So on its own, I think it's an average series. It's an okay series as an adaptation. It just was not Cowboy Bebop in its essence. They got more wrong than they got right in terms of adaptation. So it just didn't mirror Cowboy Bebop in its entirety by the end. As I mentioned before, I think Spike and Jet were really done. Their bromance was pretty much the standout for the entire series. This is what kept me going. But by the time we got halfway through the series, I found myself just scrolling through and watching it in the back as background noise and distracted. It was just not pulling my attention anymore. So I mean, the writing, the script for all of the characters they were just not particularly good. They weren't particularly resemblant. They didn't resemble the characters from the source material at all. So they got a lot more wrong than they got right as far as an adaptation goes. As a space opera series on its own by any other name, it's an okay watch, but I've seen better, and so I've seen better. I think with these adaptations, as I mentioned, whoever it is that is greenlighting these has no notion of what the anime industry is about, or what a lot of these projects are about. They just don't know, and I think this is where Netflix needs to look at whoever it is that is greenlighting these projects in particular, needs to look at that person and reevaluate what they're doing, or find someone who knows what it is that they're doing, because they're continuously missing. They missed with Death Note and they missed with this, and it's only going to hurt them in the long run when they want to do further adaptations. I think it's also Netflix doing the One Piece adaptation, and I would not do that. They're probably gonna move forward with it anyway. You know what? Now that I think about it, because One Piece doesn't really have nuance. it does One Piece is less art and more fan service, so I think they can get away with doing that a lot more. The only obstacle that they will run in with One Piece is really the devil fruit abilities. That's the one thing that they may run into issues with, because even Luffy's ability to stretch, his powers revolve around him stretching his arms and limbs like Mr. Fantastic. So a lot of the abilities are very crazy and just far out there over the top, and they're gonna have difficulty doing that, whether it's the CGI or whatever needs to be practical or not. It's gonna be a lot. It has to be a lot of CGI, and if it doesn't have a big enough budget to make them look good, it's just not gonna work. It's just not gonna work, because you have people with lasers just cutting through things and swords cutting through ships, and people turning into smoke and flames. It's very weird. The reason why I liked One Piece initially was the powers and the story of going searching for One Piece, the treasure. I eventually fell off the anime because it stopped making sense at a certain point, and it was just being milked after a while by the writer for money. So it was not about One Piece anymore. They just kept moving the goalposts to kind of milk the series. So I stopped watching. But I think they have a better shot being a live action adaptation of that than they do of something like, Cowboy Bebop, because the story is important. In One Piece, the story is less important and it's more around the fantastical fighting and so on. So I think they have a much better job being successful there. But so I don't know what the future is like for the adaptations. I mean, as we've seen, things like Hellbound, Alice in Borderland, which are adapted from either webcomics or manga, which are doing relatively well on Netflix as well. But those are the ones that are more grounded, and are a bit more realistic and in nature. And so they found success there. But for the more nuanced stories, it's just whoever it is that is writing or greenlighting these just don't understand how to capture that essence from the source material. But for me personally, honestly, I would have preferred to see Netflix do a Cowboy Bebop animated series, not a remake, but within the Cowboy Bebop world with a different set of characters. As we go through the series, we'll note that there are a lot of other bounty hunters and cowboys and so on. There are a lot of them. I think they could have just done an animated series within the same world and with a different set of characters by different names, and that could have worked. Hell, this could have worked if they had done it in the same world, different characters, because most of these are different characters. They are not the same characters. So, if this was Cowboy Bebop, something, the adventures of these persons who are not Spike, Jet, and Faye, then this could have been its own thing. And as I said, as its own thing, it is serviceable. It is average. It's okay as its own thing. But as an adaptation of Cowboy Bebop that we know as an anime, it's just not really well done. But as far as these adaptations go, I don't know why no one has suggested it to them, or maybe they have and they feel they need to build their library and that's why they're pumping these things out. But as far as animation goes, I think they need to understand that that quality in the long run is a lot better than quantity. They need to slow down and focus on putting out quality content and not so much putting out numbers. Because for a lot of these projects, I think they would have worked a lot better if they were in the universe with a different set of characters by a different name, animated, and take the time. And it's one of the reasons I gather why we see a lot of CGI anime on their platform, but a lot of them just don't work. They did a Ghost in the Shell before, a new Ghost in the Shell anime, and it was full CGI, and it got bombed on YouTube because it was just bad. It looked bad. And when you're adapting a series that that many people were introduced to because the art was just beautiful, you cannot do that. And I don't think whoever is in charge of greenlighting these projects understand the anime community that much. And so they need to get someone who actually does. So all of these projects that are being pumped out, they need to slow it down. They need to focus on doing the animation. I know hand-drawn cell animation takes time, but you're much better off investing in that project than you are pumping out several of these that are huge misses. Ghost in the Shell missed. They tried to do Dragon's Dogma, which also missed because it looked horrendous. I think they tried to do this what was it called? Altered Carbon. They tried to do an animated version of that as well, but again with the same style of animation that no one likes. So I mean, they need to take the time, slow down, take the time to do the quality anime, hand drawn if you have to. I know for all of these projects it can take some time, especially because Netflix likes to do. Now, they like to drop all the episodes at once, and that's a bit difficult to do with hand-drawn cell animation because it takes a long time. But take the time, take the time to actually invest in these projects. If it takes 2 years or whatever the case may be, give the artists and the creative team time to do it. And I think you'll gather a loyal fan base that way, versus people that are just here to see this one thing and then move on. So I just hope they take the lessons from it. I'm not interested in the One Piece adaptation that's coming up, but I am interested in the Avatar and Last Airbender adaptation that's coming up. Like the rest, I do feel they should have just done a new animated Avatar series, different characters, different avatar. Rather than trying to redo this, because they are going to make changes, and whatever happens, someone's going to be displeased, someone's going to complain, and it's going to be difficult to do some of the things that you want to do from the animated version in live action. So a lot of these projects would just be much more serviceable as animated projects, right? And whoever it is, as I said, whoever it is that is greenlighting this needs to understand a bit more about animated and the anime community and what they actually want, because this was one where they actually did not understand, and they actually failed to deliver. Oh my. Yeah, I still have hopes for Avatar: The Last Airbender. Despite the creators having left the project, the lead writer from the initial Airbender series wasn't actually attached to begin with, so I'm not too concerned about the creators actually leaving, because they weren't the lead writers on the series itself. So I'm still looking forward to this adaptation that they're doing, but as I said, I think they would have been better off just doing another Avatar in an animated form, and they'd find much more success there. And I hope that's the lesson that they take away from this. All right, guys, that's it from me. Be sure to post down below. Let me know what your thoughts are, what you liked about Cowboy Bebop, what you didn't like. Are you looking forward to a season 2? Do you think there should be a season 2? Post down below, let me know. Remember to hit like and subscribe, and I'll see you for the next one.